My name is London Rain. Thank you for joining me in my studio for the first episode on the PRODIUM channel. Today I'll be breaking down the top sample from my latest pack. Let's get into it.
God's name in eternal glory, we believe in God's
So the way that I approach this is a new experiment that I came up with to kind of switch it up, give me new inspiration, and it's working pretty good so far. So I basically take whatever kind of analog stuff I want to use, like one of my mixers, my electric guitar, my Moog, and connect all of that to each other with the mixer's main output going to my interface. Now I just press record in my DAW and just start playing around on my instruments with the sole intention to experiment and come up with interesting sounds. After recording for a few minutes, I skip through that really long audio file and try to find little pieces that I can use as one-shots and collect all of them on a separate track. After I'm done with that, it's the first time in the process that I'm even thinking about chords, and I started this sample by playing those in. The actual sound for them came from me just putting my hand on my Taisho Godo while having it connected to my mixer. Putting my hand on it increased the hum that is coming from the very cheap internal mic of the Taisho Godo already, and I enhanced that even more by boosting the bass on my mixer. I dragged that sound into Logic's sampler, played in the chords, and processed them with Universal Audio's rotary speaker. Although this was what the sample making process started with, the sample itself starts with something else, which is this choir.
God's name in eternal glory, we believe in.
Something super important that helped me compose more freely is creating awareness for the rules that I'm following subconsciously, why I'm following them, and asking myself if they're helpful or if they're holding me back. So for example, a while ago, the sound that I started the sample creation process with usually ended up being the start of the actual sample. Although there might have been way better ideas that came from that very first one and would have made a way more interesting intro. But there was this subconscious barrier in my head that kept me from being flexible, moving things around, or scrapping them completely. I think exploring your own brain, looking for subconscious rules and blockades is a really helpful journey to take on as an artist to free yourself and ultimately help you make better music. Alright, now back to the choir. I want to take you through my thought process behind it real quick. So the first thing I always try to come up with is a main melody. Usually I just sing a bunch of stuff until I find something that I like.
God's name in eternal glory, we believe in.
As soon as I have that, I click it into a piano roll with a stock piano sound loaded up. This really helps me to visualize the movement in between the notes and is a great guide for singing in the layers later on. To come up with those layers, it's really helpful to know the chords that are corresponding to your main melody. In this example, the whole intro just consists of an A minor chord, so it was really simple. The notes that I'm able to play with now are the root notes, the third, the fifth, the seventh, and sometimes the ninth if it fits. Now just make sure that most of the notes between your layers aren't too close to each other, which can make it sound a little muddy sometimes. And I found myself liking my choirs to be a little more transparent. So I just go ahead, create another layer and start clicking in notes. There are three things that I focus on when doing that. First, in this example, the note has to be within the A minor chord like I already showed you. Second, have contrasting movement in between layers and notes. Alright, so these are the layers that I came up with for the choir right here. On the top right here in red is the main melody that I came up with. You can see for the second layer, I chose to start with the E, which is the 5th of the A minor chord. And already for the second layer, I got contrasting movements. For example, in the main melody, we're moving down, we're moving down. This one is staying the same, staying the same. Right here, after that downwards movement, we're going back up. In that second layer, we have a downwards movement, but we keep going down. In the end, we have a downwards movement again in the main melody, and in the second layer, we're going up. Moving on to the third layer, I actually didn't keep the first two notes the same like I did right here, but created this little movement to make it more interesting. Right here, I'm using the C, which is the 3rd of the A minor chord, and the A, which is the root note of the A minor chord. And you can see this layer right here has really small distances between the notes. This right here even smaller, and for the third layer I went pretty big to create a little bit of contrast. So you can also experiment a lot, not only with the direction of movement but also the distance in between the notes. For the bottom layer, I always just use the root note of the chord to kind of tie the whole choir together. So in this case, you can see I just used the A throughout the whole thing because it's the root note of A minor. Third, while creating your layers, always check if you're actually able to sing them. If you aren't, try to find that piece of the choir that gives you trouble and experiment with rewriting it. Now that I have my 4 to 5 layers, I can start recording. So I usually just take my mic and put it somewhere in the middle of my room and sing in each layer 3 to 5 times. For every recording, I change my position relative to the mic. I might do one here, one here, one here, one facing away from the mic, one behind the mic, and so on. I generally tend to sing the middle and the high layers relatively far away from the mic because I want those to be super wide. For the lower ones, I'm moving in a little closer to get less room reverb and a more focused sound. In the DAW, I group the 3 to 5 recordings for each layer together, pan the individual recordings left and right. The higher I sang in the layer, the wider I'm panning. I use a stock EQ on the groups to get rid of unnecessary lows, muddy mids, and to boost the highs a little bit. All of those groups get summed together and treated with a compressor and a reverb. In this case, I also used Arturia's tube distortion for a little more grit. To transition into the next part after the choir, I sang in a solo vocal.
We believe in God's name.
I stood pretty far away from the mic while recording and used a reverb chamber plugin to get a more in a room kind of sound. I also played in one guitar chord. Another one of those subconscious rules that I talked about earlier was that I thought every instrument that I added to my composition had to play an important role or had to be heard multiple times. But that guitar chord literally appears once and never again, and I think it's the perfect amount. Both the guitar and the solo vocal have some noise at the end of the recording. Like on my vocal, you can basically hear how I'm walking back to my Mac to stop the recording.
In God's name.
I automated the gain on both of those noise tails to create a short organic riser before having a kick and a bass hit.
In God's name.
I think room noise is a really interesting and underused texture and has a super soft and natural character to it, so maybe something for you to try out. Next up, we have a perk. I think this came from me plucking a string on my Taisho Godo without actually letting it ring. But I'm not really sure because all of these sounds are coming from this very big sound exploration recording from the beginning. And sometimes I find sounds in there that I don't even remember making. Next is a bass hit from the UAD Moog plugin. The preset is called Sick Filtered Bass Sub. And it's one of my favorite ways to add some subtle low end to a sample. Next is a kick I cut out of the sound exploration recording as well. And of course that weird flute lick that you can hear throughout the whole sample. I actually played that in with my flute, did some pitching around in Melodyne and used a super short tape echo and a low cut to get the final sound. Right before the next part, I used 2 sounds from the sound exploration recording again. For the transition itself, I used this sound. I was basically sliding my hand across the strings of the Taisho Godo and using the built-in echo from my mixer. In the DAW, I used Arturia's tube distortion again to boost the bass. To accentuate that break that I'm doing with the main chords, I recorded myself inhaling and also added a perk. The next section consists of the exact same chorus, but using a one-shot I got from playing the Taisho Goro the way it's actually supposed to be played. To get those little dropouts you're hearing, I actually stretched the raw recording so it was double the length. Ran that through my tape machine while touching the roller, which is giving it those glitches, and sped it back up in the DAW. For the processing, I used the chorus, Mellowfy, and EQ, and some pan automation. In the second part of that section, I'm layering the new main chorus with the ones from earlier, but halftime to give it some variation. That's all I have for today. I really hope that this was helpful. You can download and listen to the pack that this sample is from on Waves. The link is below. As always, I really appreciate you taking your time watching this, and I'll see you soon. Love.